The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Karen McGovern, Deputy Division Director of Legal Affairs for the Division of Professions and Occupations. I want to welcome you and thank you for attending the stakeholder meeting for the Licensed Professional Counselor Board. Before we get started, I want to introduce staff members from the division that are present. I have Laura Bravo, who's a policy analyst who is attending the meeting, and Darcy Magnuson, who's a regulatory analyst, and they both will help me facilitate this meeting. Wanted to thank you all for your flexibility as we transition to a 100% virtual platform. Given the current pandemic, we are learning a whole new way of interacting with the public. And so I certainly appreciate your flexibility in that. Remember, if you are going to speak, that you mute your phone or turn it to vibrate so that we don't get that interruption. And then also keep in mind that when you are unmuted and you're speaking, we can hear all of the background noise. So if you can minimize that, we tend to get a lot of feedback on this platform. So just trying to do everything we can do to minimize that. Also, if there's a point where you're not hearing me, please raise your hand or put a comment in the question box so we know that that I'm garbled or there's feedback on my end. Today we are going to be talking about the implementation of Colorado House Bill 2013-26, which creates an occupational credential portability program that replaces the current endorsement statute. We are going to talk about the implementation of Colorado Senate Bill 2102, which requires providers to disclose discipline or convictions of sexual offenses or misconduct, and the implementation of House Bill 2012-06, which was the mental health sunset bill. Your comments today are very important. They are what's going to shape the rules for the implementation of these bills. We want to make sure that that you understand our goals in creating these rules are to clarify and explain the legislation, to ensure minimum competency to enter and to continue practicing in the workforce, and to provide only that regulation that is absolutely necessary for consumer protection without creating unnecessary barriers for the marketplace. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the website at a later date. And since we're on this webinar forum, when you want to make a comment about the rules, please raise your hand. When that happens, someone will unmute your line and call on you to provide your comments. For those of you who don't want to speak or don't have the audio capability, you can chat your comments into the questions box, and we will read those for the group so that we all have the benefit of hearing each other's feedback and ideas. We have a rather large group today, so I'm going to ask that you keep your comments between 3 and 5 minutes to make sure that we get to everyone. Also, if you want to comment that you agree with someone, that's just fine, but trying to eliminate repetitive comments because we want to make sure that we can get to everyone. Also, I want to start out and make sure that we're all clear that this is the forum to make comments on the rules, and we're not going to be able to answer specific questions about your specific licensure or candidacy or hours and things like that. If you have a question that's specific to you, it's better that you address those to the board staff so that they can walk through with you and answer those questions. To get started, I just want to briefly talk a little bit about the bills for the purpose of those people who haven't been on the previous stakeholder meetings. Colorado House Bill 2013-26 creates the Occupational Credential Portability Program, which replaces the old endorsement laws. Essentially, this law says that a person, so in your case, a licensed professional counselor who holds an LPC license in another state in good standing, and who can demonstrate substantially equivalent credentials and experience, and who does not have prior discipline or something that would otherwise violate the Mental Health Practice Act, are eligible for a Colorado license. The bill also allows for military spouses to obtain a 3-year temporary license free of charge that allows them to practice in Colorado while they have orders to be here, military orders. And again, the criteria for them to get that temporary licensure is a license in good standing from another state, an LPC license. For Senate Bill 2102, that new law requires that as of March 1st, 2021, any licensee, any LPC licensee who has a conviction for a sexual offense or who has been disciplined and the basis is sexual misconduct and is serving a current term of probation or restriction, they are required to disclose that to their clients. We will go through that rule and talk about what the exemptions are and what the individual requirements are when we get to that rule. And then the last piece of legislation is the mental health sunset, and that is given us quite a few changes that go to all of the mental health professions, and then some changes that are specific to the LPC profession. And I took my screen down for just a second so you don't think you've lost visual, so that I can kind of walk through those changes with you. And I apologize, but I'm working from one screen, and so I need to switch over. So I guess I can share this piece with you, and maybe that'll be helpful for you to follow along. The Mental Health Bill modifies mandatory disclosure requirements that requires that your disclosure include a statement that medical records may not be maintained after 7 years. It expands and updates title protection for mental health professionals. It clarifies prohibited activities to include a crime related to the practice of a mental health profession. And then it also clarifies that offering or giving commissions or rebates for referrals is prohibited, but clarifies that if you're paying money for services provided like marketing, office space, administrative, consultative, or clinical services, that's not included in there. It clarifies the requirements for professional service corporations. It clarifies that the Licensed Professional Counselor Board can suspend a licensee's license for failure to comply with a board-ordered mental or physical health examination. It creates a mental health disciplinary record work group to make recommendations regarding records that impact the initial licensure, certification or registration, and ongoing practice. It clarifies that mental health professionals may administer opiate antagonists and then provides immunity for several circumstances for that administration. And it clarifies the exemptions from licensure, which are found in Article 245, which includes students practicing in a school program and a professional practicing auricular acudetox in accordance with law. It also clarifies disclosure of confidential communications. As it relates to licensed professional counselors specifically, sorry if I'm scrolling. I know it kind of makes you feel get motion sickness, but here we are. It clarifies the requirements for licensed professional counselor applicants. It clarifies and defines clinical supervision and requirements, and it includes one of those being telesupervision. It requires the board determine education and training for supervision of other mental health professionals. So with that, I'm going to switch back over to the rules so that we can start there and start going through the rules. Let me. Okay, here we are. So does anybody have any questions about the statutes or the implementation piece before we start on the rules? Questions or comments?
We do have a hand raised. Carrie Krinsky. Carrie, you're self-muted. If you want to unmute your line, you can ask your question or share your thoughts. Carrie? Carrie, you're still muted. If you want to share anything, you have to unmute your line. Otherwise, you can send a comment or a question via the question section of the webinar, and we can read that out loud. We'll come back to you. Let's see, I have another hand from Martha Uchinek. Martha, your line is muted. You want to go ahead?
I didn't know that I raised my hand. I thought my hand was down.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. Lori Johnson. Lori? Okay, your hand went down. Oh, it's back up. I'm not sure, Lori, did you want to share anything? I've unmuted your line. Nope, okay. Go ahead, Lori.
No, I'm okay. I'm sorry. I didn't know the hand gesture, so I have no question.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any other hands raised and no written comments.
Okay, so let's get started. So we're looking down at the rules, and these are the current rules of the board. And then we will stop when we get to places where there is proposed revision. And so the first place I think we need to look here, get down there. We're going to start with supervision of mental health practitioners and supervisory relationships. And I know this has been quite a sticky wicket. And so I imagine that we'll have quite a few comments on this rule. And so we want to open it up at this time for comments. And here is the proposed language where we've received a lot of commentary and a lot of concern. So this would be the place where I'd like to hear feedback and comments and suggested language. Whatever you guys think about this piece, now would be the time to try to get this worked out.
Okay, we have a hand raised from Dory Lewis. Dory?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So it says that we need a certain number of hours, and I was wondering if to become a supervisor of training, we have to have a certain number of hours of training to become a supervisor. And I was wondering if those hours are just like regular hours, or are they considered university hours, which can be a lot longer? So for example, I think it says 6 hours. Is 6 hours just like a CE credit of 6 hours, or 6 hours like university credit 6 hours?
Okay, that's a good question. And I think basically we started with 6 hours, and then we've gone through, we've had 3 joint mental health stakeholder meetings. And so I think we're now at 16 hours is the suggestion by stakeholders. We've gotten 16 hours up through 45 hours. So I think that's a good question. And I will add here that maybe we should define what the hours are.
Okay. And is there going to be a, I guess, a specific, can we get training anywhere through any postgraduate training, or does it have to be like a certain credentialed by somebody specifically?
As the rule stands now, there's no the board isn't saying where you should receive this training. I think there has been some suggestion about what that training should include, but that's certainly something that we can look at. Do you have suggestions?
I mean, I know on the, I think it's the NBCC or NCC website, they have some like listed programs that they have in other states. And some of those are, I think they're like 3 days long and you can do them online or in person. And so I think it would be maybe good if our website had a list of places that we could go that might provide those courses and options.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple other hands raised. Let me find them. Bear with me. Rio Leslie, you are muted. Dr. Leslie, if you want to unmute your line. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I have two concerns right now. One I addressed at the last meeting, and one to piggyback on what was discussed by the person that spoke before me. In terms of providing the training, I'd like to see as many providers possible involved, so no one's excluded that can provide the training. My concern is always a monopoly and exclusion that come out of these kind of changes legislatively or by rules. And then the second one is, what does postgraduate mean? Does it mean since the person graduated from graduate school, or does the training institution itself have to be a postgraduate level? What does postgraduate mean? Is this specific to the individual's experience or specific to the institution providing the training?
That's a good question, Dr. Leslie. I put in the comments, and I recognize that you brought this up at our meeting the other day, define what is postgraduate. I think my thought was postgraduate from your professional counseling program, but I'm open to what other stakeholders do.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McGovern. And I guess that would raise another question. Maybe it's too early for it. Maybe next Friday is better. Is some training that people have had since graduate program retroactively countable? Like, for example, I'm an AMFT approved supervisor. I've been one since 1996. I had to take a 30-hour class to get that credential. So just curious, is this only post July 14th, or can some similar training be counted prior to July the 14th?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's find the next hand raised. Lori, I can't pronounce your last name, I'm sorry. Perrier? I can't pronounce that name, I'm sorry. Lori?
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, go ahead. If you want to introduce yourself, so I butchered your name,
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Lori, yeah, no problem. Lori Pereira.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. I had similar questions. I just wanted to make sure that we're defining things clearly, as well as coming from the quality assurance and compliance background. Wondering if there'll be more details laid out in what we're trying to achieve with the clinical supervision training, because there are many different facets, and want to see if there is something consistently that we're trying to reach across the board to make sure that we are meeting those, checking off those boxes, but also providing that good clinical supervision.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So are you talking about what the training should include?
Yes, I'm wondering if there's going to be clarity provided on what is, I think it's good to include this in the rules, and I think it's personally, I think it's a great idea. However, what is our goal in adding this into the rules? And if so, can we provide clarity on what we're looking for as a definition of what kind of meets the standard for training for a good clinical supervisor?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Next hand is Linda Burdick. Linda, if you want to unmute your line, you can share your comments or questions.
So I had put a question in the chat box too, but I'm an LPC practicing as a school psychologist. I'm also a school psychologist. So I practice in a school setting, not in a regular clinical setting. So how is that going to impact us? Because we are trying to get more people dual license like me, especially the school psychologists, that we can bill Medicaid.
I think what is important here is to look at number 3, and if this doesn't answer your question, please let me know, but it's professional counselors engaged in the clinical supervision of mental health professionals.
So how would that impact the people in the school setting wanting to get their LPC?
I'm not sure I understand the question. If you're talking about, if you're working in a school setting and you're not supervising the clinical practice of LPCs, then you're not required to meet this requirement. If you are working in a school setting and you want to become licensed as an LPC, then I think that's a different subject, and something that maybe the board could answer, the board staff.
Yeah. So, but we would still, in order to supervise those people, even though they're in a school setting, not clinical, we would still have to go through this process to be their supervisor.
No, only for clinical supervised hours.
Okay.
So in
Thank
school
you.
settings, this is not included.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next question or comments we have are from Francesca Mix. Francisca, apologies. Go ahead.
Hi. I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear?
Yes, go ahead.
So I just wanted to, speak to the several points that have been mentioned thus far. As far as the 16-hour requirements of like what topics need to be covered, if you look to the ACS, which is the Approved Clinical Supervisor credential, basically, I do believe if we look toward the Colorado Counseling Association, they actually presented a proposal which identified all of the topics that need to be covered in the 16 hours. And the 16 hours definitely would cover fundamentals of clinical supervision. So some of the topics that you would be reviewing would entail understanding the function and roles and responsibilities, evaluation and gatekeeping, contracts, things of that nature. And in a fundamental class, a 2-day training would cover that. And the APA, the ACS, and social workers, they all have codes of ethics, and it's really important that we understand those codes of ethics if we are supervising. My opinion that I believe that if anybody is in good standing, current standing, having an approved LMFT supervisory designation and or an ACS, as long as that is in good standing, I think that should be an automatic, you meet the requirement for education. To speak to Dr. Rio Leslie, as long as the fundamentals class covers those identified topics, I believe if that's the class, anyone should be able to offer that training so that it is not monopolized. And in fact, I mean, I just took a 2-day intensive through PESI. So there are multiple opportunities to engage in online training, face-to-face training, live webinar training on this exact topic of the fundamentals of clinical supervision. So I honestly don't think it will become an issue, just because as long as those topics are being covered, it doesn't matter where you're getting it, as long as it's covering that. And as far as postgraduate, I personally believe that it's graduating a CACREP accredited or an equivalent master's degree or doctorate degree as far as when that postgraduate training can start. So I think to sum it up, I would strongly recommend reviewing the CCA's proposal, because in that it does highlight the competency-based approach to training or the education. And also it's highlighting, there are multiple ways to automatically get quote unquote grandfathered in if you have a current good standing as a supervisor already. Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. We do have the written comments and the written suggestions, and we will incorporate those. The board has the opportunity to look at all of those. So we will incorporate that into the board's consideration, but just didn't want to tie up this document and wanted to use this document specifically for stakeholder feedback during this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Gregory Elliott. Gregory, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I'm also in support of what Francesca just laid out as far as the competencies that would need to be covered in the training. And as long as those competencies are covered, also in support of what Dr. Leslie said, I think the more providers that are offering the training, the better. And is going to make the training more accessible to counselors throughout the state. Regarding the earlier point on the previous page about the 3 years, I have heard from a number of nonprofit organizations that that's going to create a pretty significant encumbrance for them, where they would have trouble being able to provide clinical supervision to their interns, with their current staff. And so I think I've heard from a number of different organizations that that's a significant concern for them, especially in the nonprofit sector, as well as just creating a situation where it would be, it would be much longer before counselors could be promoted within the profession after getting their license. So I think that's a concern that needs to be considered with that first clause A right there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right. Let's see who we have next. Allison Festa. Allison, if you unmute your line, you can share your thoughts.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Allison Festa. I'm representing Naropa University. And one question we had relating to this is just kind of clarifying whether or not the supervision requirement applies to just supervisors that are working with Lpccs or in that postgraduate time, or if it also applies to students who are completing their practicum and internship, and kind of understanding if our faculty supervisors or site supervisors that are supervising our students during that clinical placement need to have the supervision requirement as well met.
So the intent of the bill, as I read it, is that this is for those licensed professional counselors who are supervising the candidates in their clinical supervision hours. So that does not include faculty at a university who's supervising clinical practicum, because they have their own set of requirements for being faculty at an educational institution.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Thank you. Angela Shannon? Angela?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. So I am LPC, and I am a supervisor at methadone assisted treatment program. And I am concerned about the 3-year qualification, because it seems to me when I'm looking up qualifications for other places, like I'm also trying to get my LAC right now, and I'm almost done with classes. I have the clinical supervision classes that I'm taking next for the LAC. So I have kind of 2 questions. One is, why isn't there a 3-year mark for the other professions? I mean, I'm just kind of curious as to why that came up for LPCs. And, if you've been supervising already before this, then is there some way we can report to the board about what we've done so that we can be qualified as supervisors without having to wait the other year or 2 years that we have left to wait. And then the other point is that if I am already doing clinical supervision under the lab, would that be the qualifications for the clinical supervision required for LPC? And I know we're still trying to figure out, you know, all of the topics that we need to cover. So those are my 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm putting that in here.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have a few more hands raised, and then I will read some written comments. Jackie, oh, where did it go? Jackie Payla Schuster? Jackie?
Yes, wow, nice job with my last name.
Okay.
That was excellent. So I'm going back to the person that was talking about supervising students in the school, or not students, school counselors. And you were saying, well, this is only for mental health clinicians. However, the definition of counseling in the state of Colorado includes a lot of things that school counselors are doing because they are mental health professionals, as well as some other things. So I guess I'm wondering, are you now saying school counselors can't get their LPC by being a school counselor?
No, I don't think that comment had, I think either I misunderstood the question or maybe
I could have misunderstood.
It's okay, I might have been unclear. Basically what I was trying to say is that these new supervisor qualifications do not pertain to graduate school faculty.
No, I'm not. I'm going clear back to the person who was a school psychologist.
Oh, okay.
And was supervising school counselors in their school who were working towards their LPC.
Right.
So
that's a question that's really outside the purview of these rules. And I think that's the question where I suggest that you contact board staff and they may be able to walk you through that nuance.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, essentially, I want to be clear, these qualifications pertain to a supervisor who is supervising someone who is obtaining their supervised clinical hours to obtain their LPC. So if you want to supervise someone and they want to count those hours towards their LPC, then the supervisor has to be qualified under this section.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Next we had Dr. Ryan Burkhart. Ryan.
Thank you, Karen and Darcy, for sitting with us today. My name is Dr. Ryan Burkhart. I am the Executive Director of the Colorado Counseling Association. So CCA is the state branch of the American Counseling Association, and we work to advance the counseling profession and the 10,000 plus professional counselors and professional counselor candidates in Colorado through advocacy, training, and awareness. So we really feel the challenge with this rule is finding a balance between empowering supervisors and also potentially overburdening counselors. So on September 7th, the CCA created an advocacy campaign which provided an opportunity for counselors to engage this rulemaking process in a very easy way. Since September 7th, 347 counselors have emailed Dora expressing their concern with the LPC board's current course. While a 3-year licensure requirement for supervision is appropriate for certifications that advance basic skills, such as the ACS, such experience-based requirements as a minimum qualification for anyone to provide supervision as an LPC will actually harm our profession. Basically, what this 3-year requirement is going to do is prevent counselors in Colorado from accepting promotions as clinical directors or clinical supervisors for 3 years after they get licensed. This type of experience-based requirement really puts LPCs in Colorado at a disadvantage. So anytime that we increase the quality of supervision, we increase the quality of the clinical service and the protection that we afford to consumers. This is common sense. So there are competency-based requirements such as training and continuing education that improve the quality of supervision without burdening counselors like a 3-year requirement does. So the CCA and nearly 350 counselors in the last week have emailed DORA, strongly urging DORA to adopt the following. So 1, supervisors should be required to provide a supervision disclosure to supervisees. This is pretty standard practice. We're also asking that one of the following things must be met. A 2-year grad course in supervision, a 2-credit grad course in supervision from a K-CREP program, and we were okay with these 6 hours. I'm actually kind of shocked to see that we jumped from 6 to 16 hours. So CCA is perfectly okay with 6 hours of training that cover the following competency areas: roles and functions of clinical supervisors, models and methods of clinical supervision, supervisory relationship issues, cultural issues in clinical supervision, group supervision, legal and ethical issues in clinical supervision, and then also some training on how we evaluate supervisees. So we're asking for a 2-credit grad course, the disclosure, or the ACS or CES. We also believe that should be automatically grandfathered into this process. So one of those things have to be met. And then we're also advocating that if you're going to do supervision in a 2-year renewal licensure period, you earn 3 continuing professional development hours that have some emphasis in clinical supervision. So 1.5 hours of training a year. We really believe that it's competency-based requirements that will empower counselors in Colorado, not burden counselors. And we also strongly believe, to join Dr. Rio Leslie and Dr. Greg Elliott, that these trainings should be offered by a wide variety of professionals in the state. So we really hope that these 350 or 347 emails that DORA has received in the last 11 days and CCA's recommendations will be strongly considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, and I appreciate it. And as I said earlier, just to make sure everyone's clear, we have received all the written comments, and we will be incorporating that, and the board will have that to review and consider in rulemaking. We certainly appreciate everybody's feedback and them, contacting us in writing. And I just want to make sure with this group that it's not, we have that information. It's just wanting to give everybody on this meeting a look at the same rules that everyone else has looked at. And then we will incorporate it all together for the hearing.
Okay. I'm going to switch over and read some written comments now, and then we'll come back to the other folks who still have their hands raised, just because some of these written comments have been submitted quite some time ago. Hallie Nurnberg stated, I'm in support of suggestions here to increase the number of hours of training and lowering the number of years of licensure needed. This supports years of evidence. This supports evidence on years of experience don't translate into ability to provide adequate supervision. Perhaps the more hours of training, the lower number of years of licensure needed. And then she also said, in terms of training, mirroring the ACS requirement would be helpful regarding clarity. So thank you for those comments. Annemie Van Linden said, I would suggest that hours be hours and not university credits. And they agreed that do not exclude those who can provide the supervision training or even necessarily how the training is provided. I'm not sure I quite understand that comment. It might have been in reference to somebody else's. If you'd like to clarify your comment, feel free to raise your hand. But thanks for submitting those. Sarah Mallett said, when will it be determined what these hours are and what qualifies so current supervisors can obtain these trainings in order to be compliant for an agency? So I think that the question is really, when are the rules going to be finalized and effective?
So the intent is that the rules will be adopted, and I'll give you that date. It's next week. They'll be adopted on a permanent and an emergency basis so that we can get the law implemented. But you can see down here that there's a grandfather period, and so the intent of the LPC board was not to burden people and not to keep people out, meaning people who are currently getting their hours supervised, and if their supervisor didn't meet these credentials, we didn't want to harm them in obtaining their degree. So we have this period where anyone who is a supervisor will have to attest that they've completed the training by September of 2021. So to answer your question, the rules will go into effect next week, so you'll know exactly what training is required, and then you will have a year to get that in place.
Okay, and I think what you just mentioned, Karen, addresses this comment. I'm going to go ahead and read it. Jennifer Richardson asked, is there any grandfathering? That is, I've been an LPC since 1995 and supervised others for 20 plus years and have taken supervisor training, though it has been years. Will those count?
And
so I think what you're saying,
that,
go ahead, Karen.
So as I said earlier, we're going to put that in. You can see I put that in the comment of, are we going to look retroactively at training? And that's a decision the board will have to make. And so stay tuned.
Thank you. Misty Marquez Lozano said, for the 16 hours, is this above the 40 hours required for licensing for the 2 years?
Okay, so I'm not sure I understood that question.
So I'm going to try and rephrase it, but Misty, if you want to clarify, feel free to raise your hand. I believe what she's asking is, there's a 40-hour requirement for education every 2 years for continuing education. Can these 16 hours be a part of that, or are these on top of that continuing education hours?
So what you're asking is can these classes taken for supervision count as part of your continuing education? I think that's something that we will ask the board to consider.
Okay, thank you. And again, Misty, if that was not your question, please let me know. All right, Kevin Robinson asks, is Dora keeping the licensed professional counsel or supervisor title, or is that going away with these changes? If keeping it, does that mean there will be some sort of certification process to be an LPCS?
The title for LPC is not changed.
Okay.
And again,
Kevin, if you need further.
No, go ahead, Laura. Sorry.
I was saying, if Kevin needed further clarification, he could submit another question or raise his hand if that didn't answer his question.
And again, just making sure that that I clarify that, you know, the titles are set forth in the statute, which those are laws that are made by the legislature. So the board doesn't determine what the titles are for a profession. And so in the sunset, licensed professional counselor was not changed. The only change made to titles per se was for psychotherapists.
Okay, thank you. Sarah Mallett stated, I agree with Dr. Leslie. And then Sarah Mallett and Misty Marquez Lozano both have questions regarding kind of the interaction of these hours and hours for other professions. So Sarah's asking, would LAC classes in supervision qualify for these hours? And Misty is asking if they want to supervise both LPC and LMFT, would this mean 2 separate sets of hours are required?
And that's something I have in the comments for the board to consider. I can't answer that for the board.
Okay.
But certainly something that they will consider.
All right. Let's see, we've talked, Lydia Dumsno had asked about previous hours, and we talked about that, or how the board will have to consider whether previous hours will count. Deborah Price is saying, if an LPC is certified in another state as a supervisor and it's on the appropriate hours of supervisor training, are they considered qualified to supervise in Colorado if they're also licensed in Colorado as an LPC?
And that's something that we'll look at. It's very similar to the same question as if training that has been obtained prior to this determination of what training has to look like, that'll be included in that consideration.
Thank you. We've had quite a few folks who are echoing that question or concern about making sure the previous supervision is able to be applied to the requirements. Hallie Nurnberg and Kevin Robinson noted that, in addition to making sure hours of supervision in other professions, mental health professions, could count towards these hours. Let's see, then Amanda Laughlin has asked, does the supervision of mental health professionals include graduate students, unlicensed psychotherapists, and or LPCCs?
So these supervision requirements pertain to anyone who is being supervised for clinical hours that they intend to use to qualify to be a licensed professional counselor.
Okay, thank you. Linda Burdick, I see your question regarding, is it 16 hours or NBCC hours or seat hours? So I believe, Karen, you already have noted we need to clarify what type of hours.
Yes.
Let me go over to some raised hands for a minute. Let's see if I can find any. I know we have a couple. Francisca Mix. Francisca,
hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, hello. Thanks again. I forgot to introduce myself the last time. So I'm a private practitioner in Denver. I'm an LPC, ACS, and board certified dance therapist. I just wanted to also state, it's a lot easier for me to talk than type, that I am in favor to allow clinical supervision CEUs to go toward the overall requirements to uphold a license. And the reason for this is that very much like getting an EMDR, CEU training or play therapy workshop that you can count towards your overall requirements to uphold and maintain your license, clinical supervision training should also be allowed to fulfill the overall requirement to uphold your license. And I have one other point. As far as, I'll just leave it at that. I am in favor that clinical supervision training credit hours should go toward the overall maintenance of a license. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Let me find the next person with their hand raised. Michael Just. Michael? Michael?
Yeah. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. I just have a question. You've mentioned more than once, this is just a point of clarification, that this only applies to LPCs who are supervising those that are getting their hours toward their LPCs. That's I don't see where it says that in the rules. It seems to be more general than that. It just says qualifications for supervisors in general, the way I read it under paragraph D.
Okay, so I'm going to restate again to make sure I'm clear, and I think I'm not being clear. These supervision requirements are for anyone who wants to supervise the clinical hours for someone to become an LPC. So if I'm an LPC and I'm getting my clinical hours, I'm candidate and I'm getting my hours so I can be an LPC, my supervisor needs to meet these requirements beginning September 1st, 2021.
I don't doubt what you're saying to me. I apologize for interrupting. I don't doubt what you're saying. I would ask for a point of clarification in the rules themselves so that it actually says that, because it's not clear to me that that's what it says.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any other hands raised right now, so I'm going to go back to written comments. Let's see. Anthony Van Linden asked, are the hours a one-time training, or what will the requirements be after the initial training hours?
I believe this is the required training to be a supervisor. I don't know that anything in this rule talks about ongoing training, but I'll certainly note your comment.
Okay, thank you. Deborah Price wanted to note that she was required to do 38 hours of training and supervision to become certified to supervise in Texas. So thank you for that context. Dory Lewis is stating, I agree with the comment that the training should count toward CEUs. These trainings and CEUs are costly. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Hallie Nurnberg said, in addition to the question from Naropa, if we are a community site supervising interns enrolled in a program, do we need the LPCS status?
If you're supervising people who intend to use those hours for their LPC, then yes.
Okay, thank you. And Hallie, if you need further clarification, just let us know. Jason Gagari, my apologies for mispronouncing your name, I'm sure, says, are we able to continue supervising LPC candidates as long as we complete the training before September of 2021?
Yes.
Thank you. Martha Uchinek asked, can a social worker supervise an LPCC? I'm not sure, Karen, if you have any input on that. Yeah.
I'm looking here. Okay. I don't see where it says that, but it does say that that professional counselors engaged in the clinical supervision must meet the following criteria. And so it's something that probably needs to be clarified.
Okay, thank you for bringing that point up, Martha. And the next comment I see is, please clarify what the channel is for asking questions in the future about if a particular supervision course meets Colorado supervision requirements.
Likely what will happen is that the board will set out what courses, as discussed by the association, the board will set out what competencies have to be covered in the course. And then on the website, we will provide suggestions. However, if the board, I don't believe it's the board's intent to say who can provide the course, but rather what the course must include.
Okay. Thank you. Craig Evan says there's a lot of inconsistency in what CCA is proposing. For example, the ACS credential, which CCA endorses as pathway, requires 45 class hours of training, 5 years of experience, and 4,000 hours of direct practice experience. Most university course credits equate to 15 hours per credit. So a 2 credit hour course, which CCA proposes, equates to 30 clock hours of training, not the 6 they recommend. CCA incorrectly states that there is no research supporting experience requirements. And then they said, please see other submitted comments for an annotated bibliography of that research. So I think they must have submitted written comments, which I know you, Karen, you've mentioned will be provided to the board.
Yes. So I want to stop Laura and move on. Like we're at 3:30, and I want to make sure that we get to all the rules, and then we can come back to this one.
Okay.
So let's move on to talk about the credentialing portability program. Does anyone have any concerns, any suggestions for this rule? Again, this basically talks about making sure that someone from another state who has a licensed professional counselor license in another state in good standing, that they have substantially equivalent experience or credentials, and that they don't have prior discipline, that they would be eligible to be endorsed into Colorado. If we look down here, we've not made any changes to what the requirements are to show substantial experience and credentials. So essentially, we changed some of the language from the new law, because it used to be, the test used to be qualifications, credentials and qualifications, and now the test is experience and credentials. But that does not substantially change what the board has previously required to show substantial experience.
Okay. If anyone has any comments on this rule, please raise your hand or send in a comment, question in writing. Don't see anything quite yet.
Okay, so we'll move on, and let's get to, okay, here's the licensure by examination. The first change is to make clear that applications for licensure remain active for 1 year. If the applicant fails to become licensed within the time period, the applicant must submit a new application and meet the educational experience and exam requirements in effect at the time of the application. The board, in its sole discretion, can extend the application upon written request accompanied by a showing of good cause. We've discussed in previous meetings that good cause would be defined in a policy so that everybody understands what that may be. Does anybody have any comments about that piece? The second clarification was to make sure that applicants understand that an examination score of clinical hours that are completed more than 5 years prior to the date of the application to the board will not be considered absent a showing of good cause. And that does not include candidacy. Do we have any comments about that?
Don't see anything yet. We did have a comment regarding the portability section. I'm a little unclear what this means. I'm going to go ahead and read it. Martha Uchinich stated, seems like these points you've raised about portability should be followed up on. Martha, if you want to expand on your comment, please let us know by raising your hand or submitting further written comment.
Okay.
But that's, here she's raised her hand, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute her.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Martha, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Karen brought up all of these great points about the portability, and it went by pretty fast, but it seemed as though with people coming into Colorado that there should be a way to determine whether their requirements truly meet Colorado's requirements. I thought it was odd that this wasn't in the rule, that there's some way to prove this before being allowed to actually work in Colorado. Thank you.
Okay. Sure. So let's go back there for a minute so I can explain that. When these people apply, they have to demonstrate that they are 21 years of age, which is similar to Colorado. They have to attest that they have no previous discipline and that they've reported any malpractice, any misdemeanor or felony convictions. They have to submit verification of licensure from each jurisdiction in which they've ever been licensed, and they have to show if they have any disciplinary history. They have to demonstrate that they hold a master's or doctoral degree. They have to demonstrate that they have passed an examination, the contents of which to practice includes special knowledge and skills in psychotherapy, which is tested competence for professional counseling. And they have to show that they've had at least 2 years of supervised clinical practice. So I think basically they do require that these people demonstrate that they have the same experience and credentials as someone who would be applying for a license in Colorado who's never been licensed. Does that help?
Martha, does that answer your question? I've unmuted your line.
Yes, that helps. I didn't see all of this because of how we're, talking right now, but I really appreciate you going over that. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you. We had another question regarding this section from Andrew Rose asked, do portability applicants have to pass the Colorado Jurisprudence exam? He recommends that they should have to pass it.
Okay. Thank you.
And I had a comment come in. I'm not sure if it's about a section we've talked about already. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. It's regarding temporary gap licenses for recent graduates awaiting their Lpcc credential. Is that something we've talked about yet? Should I hold off?
Go ahead.
Okay. So in regards to temporary gap licenses for recent graduates awaiting their Lpcc credential, Chris Engler is stating, I'm a current extern who's been severely impacted by this bill that was passed on July 14th. As a result, I had to terminate with Medicaid clients with very short notice if I'm working under my supervisor's licensure. I feel this is a severe ethical concern for the consumer, as well as a threat to my financial income. And then is DORA considering to create a gap license for such situations for Lpcc applicants?
So I think that the issue, and we've talked about this in other stakeholder meetings, the issue is the time from graduation to obtaining your candidacy registration. And I think what's interesting and what's been brought to my attention, and I did verify, is that you can apply for your candidacy while you are still in school before graduation, so long as your school verifies that you will graduate. And that should eliminate the need for a gap license because you should be able to get your candidacy that should go into effect right about the time of your graduation. So please let me know if that is not how you understand it. I do know there are some schools that have to go through review, and internally we are looking at to see if there's a way that we can have the review of the school done so that it just applies to everyone who graduates from that school.
Okay.
Is that helpful, or does that answer your concern?
I think so, but if that didn't answer your question, feel free to raise your hand or submit additional comments. Olivia Dumbsmell says, thank you, as I did hear that the answer will have to come from the board. And then Deborah Price, in regards to the portability, noted, I did have to pass the Colorado Jurisprudence exam when I applied for licensure in Colorado and provide all the information previously mentioned. So thanks for that clarification. Lisa Whalen is asking, how long before graduation can someone apply for their Lpcc? Do you know that offhand, Karen, or should she contact the board?
What's the question?
How long before graduation can someone apply for their Lpcc?
You'd have to ask the board about that. And so I think talking to board staff would help you in that situation.
And for anyone who needs to contact the board, the email address is on the board's website. It's dora_mentalhealthboard@state.co.us. And now we have some hands raised, so let me start.
We're going to have Laura, we're not going to be able to cover a big, and then we'll come back.
Okay, perfect.
So the other issue affecting Lpcs, which is another issue that's pretty big, is the supervision, the number of hours of clinical practice, and how many of those have to be face-to-face. And so essentially what we have is the new requirement that 1,500 of the 2,000 hours have to be completed face-to-face. And so we have this gap. Obviously, we have people who started their supervised hours a while ago, and so they wouldn't be able to use their hours if 1,500 of those weren't face-to-face. So the proposed rules have two separate rules. So it has subsection A that applies to applicants who were already engaged in their supervised postgraduate practice before the law went into effect. And then we have a set for the people who are going to start their clinical hours after the law went into effect. And so what we're proposing is that if you have started your clinical hours at this time, you'll be under the rules as they were before July 14th, so that you don't have to have a change in your clinical practice. And then anybody who starts their supervised clinical hours after the law went into effect, then they will follow the new rules, which require that 1,500 of those hours be face-to-face. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that?
We have some hands raised. Gregory Elliott.
Just for clarification, I think this has less to do with face-to-face, and it has to do with with it being direct client contact, right, versus indirect client contact. So when someone is an Lpcc, they must obtain 2,000 hours in order to become an Lpc. Of that 2,000 hours moving forward, 1,500 of that has to be direct client contact, and 500 of it can be indirect. And before that was not defined. So it doesn't have to do with face-to-face specifically. It has to do with whether or not it's direct or indirect. And that may have been confusing the way that it was just presented.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. That was the only hand up as of now. Jennifer Richardson states in a written comment that it's totally appropriate to apply new rules to those starting after 7/14 of 2020. So thanks for providing that comment. I don't see any other hands raised right now or written comments.
Okay. Well, that's good. Then I think we addressed, I know this was a big issue of contention early on, so I think we adequately addressed that by making sure that we're applying the new law to the people that are starting their clinical practice after the law went into effect.
We did have a comment come in, right? We had a couple comments come in, actually. Misty Marquez Lozano asked, is telehealth face-to-face?
The Mental Health Practice Act was revised to allow telesupervision and to allow, I guess that was just for clinical hours, so I'm not sure. I know that your supervision can be through telesupervision, but I think you'd have to look at the board policy as to telehealth requirements. And I know the board does have a policy on that.
Okay. And then Martha Uchinek has a hand raised. Martha, go ahead.
Yeah, Martha Uchinek. And my question goes back to what we were just talking about with people who are in Lpcc and receiving supervision. And I understand about the beginning before July 14th and after, but this raises a question for me about whether the supervisor has to be an LPCS or if it can be a social worker or someone other than an LPC.
Thank you, Martha. We have included that in a question and consideration for the board to look at for rulemaking.
Okay. We have a hand raised from Dr. Leslie. Go ahead.
Oh,
Dr. Leslie?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry. The question about who can supervise is actually addressed in the statute in 12-245601.5 on page 17. It says licensed psychologist, licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed clinical social worker, or licensed addiction counselor. Then the next paragraph, 2.5, defines licensed professional counselor supervisor. So that question is actually statutory in 12-45601.5 on page 17 of the Sunset Review Bill.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay. I don't have any other hands raised or comments right now.
Okay. So the next change to the rule is at 122. And as I told you earlier, students who are enrolled in the school program and practicing as part of school practicum or clinical program are exempt from licensure. We did have quite a few comments that wanted to address gaps between semesters. And so we have section B that talks about practicing as part of a school practicum, includes the continued practice between school terms up to the date of conferral of degree as necessary for continuity of care. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
I see a hand raised. Let me navigate there. Jackie Paylor-Schuster. Jackie?
Hi. Can you clarify what you mean by school practicum? Are you talking just about school counseling? Because there's programs that perhaps have other types of counseling programs as well that are doing practicums and internships.
So I would think that that's something that the board's going to have to define. And I know that in rulemaking this morning, the social workers did define the school program. And so we'll ask for the LPCs to do the same.
Great, thank you.
Okay. I don't, oh, here's one more hand. Let me find it. Andrew Rose. Andrew, you're self-muted. There you go. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. So we have 8 interns that are going to graduate next May, and they will encounter the gap. That process, exists at that time, and it sounds like we're planning on doing that, given what was just stated. So we really appreciate that. But just to say that Section B does not address the gap issue. Thanks.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. We are working to try to close the gap between graduation and candidacy, and it appears through the research is that where we're having the biggest gap is for schools that may not be certified, or I'm sorry, may not be accredited. And so what we're trying to do is to get that evaluation, that substantially equivalent educational equivalency done rather than on a candidate by candidate basis, on a school basis, so that we can put that on a list so that we can grant those candidacies quickly. We can turn those around very quickly. And so we are definitely looking at pathways to reduce that gap, understanding that it is causing continuity of care problems.
Okay, thank you. Andrew noted in comments, school basis for K-craft equivalency is terrific. So that answers the question. We have a hand raised from Francisca Mix. Francisca?
Hi, yes. Regarding the gap, I am aware that students must have completed all of their coursework in order for the university to be able to have that letter of approval from the board. I actually was the clinical director at Noeticus Counseling Center and Training Institute for a very, very long time. And universities such as CU and Regis and many others, as long as students fulfilled their coursework, that letter was sent to the LPC board, and it has been approved to, allow them to start the application for the LPCC. I do have a question. Even though this rule is stating that it is not required for a student to be on a board, could a site, in fact, require a student to be on the board so that, that could just support the professional identity of a student, so that not only are they held to the standard of their study, but they're also held to the state standard of these ethics and standards by the state if they were to apply for the unlicensed psychotherapist board. Is that still possible or no?
So one of the changes that was set forth in the Mental Health Sunset Act, one of the changes to the new law is that after July 14th, 2020, there are no more applications would be accepted for the unlicensed. It's now called the Unlicensed Psychotherapist Registry. So essentially, everyone who's on the registry as of July 14th, no new people will be added to that registry. And I think that's what's creating these gaps, and what's causing people all this concern is that they used to be able to get on the registry and work towards their clinical hours or continue with their continuity of care while they were waiting for their candidacy status. And that option's not available anymore.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Trig Evan stated that the board should know that some liability insurance policies do not cover the between semester hours for student counselors during their supervised practica or internships. When liability insurance does cover between semester hours, they often require that the university have a formal between semester hours policy. And then the question is, if the approval to see clients between semesters when not being supervised by university faculty is written into statute, would that satisfy liability insurance companies?
Okay, so nothing is written into statute, and this does not say that they do not need to be supervised. Essentially, what it says is that they are exempt from licensure. That's all this this rule 122 says is where the law says that students are exempt from licensure. This rule clarifies that a school program is defined to include the times between semesters.
Okay. Thank you for that
And
clarification.
I want to move on to Rule 1.23. And just let you guys know, I'm happy to stay after 4 and continue to take feedback and answer questions. But for those of you who have schedules, I want to make sure we get through all the rules before 4 o'clock. The next rule is 123, which is the required disclosure to clients. And this is based on the conviction of or discipline based on sexual misconduct. And this is the Senate Bill 2102 we talked about, which says on or after March 1st, 2021, a licensee of the LPC board, which also includes candidates, shall disclose to a client instances of sexual misconduct involving conviction or a guilty plea or a final agency action resulting in probation or limitation of a license. The important thing I want to point out to you before we even start down this rule is that this disclosure is only required to be made while you are serving a term of probation or parole for the criminal conviction, or while you are serving a term of probation or your license is limited by the board. What that means is as soon as you successfully complete the requirements of your conviction or your discipline, you no longer need to make the disclosure. The disclosure has to be in writing. The client needs to sign the disclosure form saying that they've received the disclosure and they agree to treatment. This disclosure is separate and apart from the mandatory disclosure requirement. So if you're in this circumstance, you have to give your client 2 separate disclosures, the mandatory disclosure and this disclosure. The timing of the disclosure, it needs to be provided to a client at the same time the client schedules a professional service appointment with the licensee. If an appointment is scheduled the same day, the services will be provided. And I'm going to actually take this out because this is not going to apply, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. The disclosure must be provided in advance of the treatment. The written disclosure needs to be given every time you see the client unless they are follow-up or scheduled treatment. So if you're going to see a client for 10 visits, you only need to give the disclosure once unless the information on your disclosure changes. Or if you see a patient and you are a client and you ask them to come back for follow-up, you do not need to make the re-disclosure so long as the information hasn't changed. There are exceptions to this, and they are listed here. So if your patient or your client is unconscious or otherwise unable to comprehend the information and they don't have a guardian available, you don't need to make the disclosure. If the visit occurs in an emergency room, a freestanding emergency department, or the visit is unscheduled, and they gave examples, consultation in inpatient facilities, you don't need to make the disclosure. You don't need to make the disclosure if the person providing the professional service is not known to the patient until immediately prior to the start of the visit. And examples of that were like the mobile crisis unit that will show up at someone's house. Or if the licensee or certificate holder does not have a direct treatment relationship or have direct contract with the patient. So does anybody have any comments or questions about this rule? And I'm going to scroll down and show you the model disclosure statement. It's very involved. There's a lot of moving pieces, which is why we set it out in this outline form to make sure that anyone who has to make the disclosure knows exactly what needs to be in that form. Do we have any comments, Laura?
I don't see any hands raised right now, and no comments on the last topic.
Okay. Okay. So I have, I'm going to let you guys know the next steps and the date for rulemaking, and then we're going to go back to comments and talk about what you guys need to talk about. For the professional counselors, their rulemaking hearing will be held on September the 25th at 9:30 a.m. You should have received a notice. If you did not, you can go to the website and get the link so that you can link in for the hearing. And so now I'm going to go back to my screen and take whatever comments we have. Just if you just tell me what topic or what rule, then we'll go to that rule. And that's, like I said, I'm happy to stay late to make sure everyone's accommodated, but wanted to make sure the people who had to leave at 4 had the information.
Okay, if anyone has any comments or questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Let me find the first person. I think I went right past. Martha, go ahead.
Yes, so I am living in two different worlds here. I'm an unlicensed psychotherapist. I've been in practice for like 25 years, and I'm also working toward becoming an LPC. So for me, I just want to know that as an unlicensed psychotherapist, everything I'm doing is still going to count toward working toward my LPC.
Yes, at this point, the only change to the psychotherapist statute was A, they changed the name from registered to unlicensed, and B, they are no longer accepting new people on the registry. So if you're currently registered, you need to make sure to renew that registration, because if you don't timely renew, you won't be able to get back on.
Right.
And otherwise, there's no changes. So these rules are clear that hours obtained as an unlicensed psychotherapist are counted.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a hand raised from Chris Engler. Chris, if you unmute your line, you can share your comments. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Listen, yeah, Karen, I was the comment that was regarding the gap license earlier. And I just want to say thank you for your answer. And I want to keep this brief so I can give more time for other people. But I understood that your answer was that this can, like, graduates can be able to apply for their LPCC before they graduate, which is great. However, my situation is that I was not able to get into the registry before July 14th, and I've had clients now as an extern, and so where my situation is that I am like needing to apply for a temporary gap license if that's possible, and who I can contact through Dora to be able to do with that, as I have people that I had to give really short notice to for termination. So I just wanted to see who I can, yeah.
Okay, so help me understand a little bit. Are you waiting on your LPCC, your candidacy?
Yes, so I actually graduated from Europa and I applied for the, I'm getting all the education equivalency approved, and I'm waiting for that to come back so that I can apply for the LPCC. But as you know, there's so many applicants currently. So that process is taking a lot longer than expected. And my goal is to get back with my clients as soon as possible because it's been really precarious for them during COVID. So yes, I am in that process right now of trying to get the LPCC.
Okay, so yeah, I think the best thing to do is to contact the board. And I know Naropa is one of the universities we're looking at to try to see how we can speed up that educational equivalency. I know that doesn't help you today, so you might want to contact board staff on the other.
Great. And you guys left that email. Do you mind just stating it one more time, and if there's a phone number too?
I have the email. I think email is the best method to contact the board right now, and that is DORA, so that's DORA _ mental health board at state.co.us, and you can find that on the board's homepage under contact information at the bottom of the homepage.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands raised. I've received a few other written comments, so I'm going to go to those. So Amanda Laughlin had a comment regarding the sexual misconduct disclosures.
Okay.
And so I'll go ahead and read that. She states, I think individuals with a conviction of any sexual misconduct need to disclose this to any client, regardless of the context. This does not keep clients safe. And then she asked, are there counselors with convictions of sexual misconduct allowed to work with minors or in environments where they would be working with survivors of sexual trauma?
So I can't answer that question. What I can say is that you know, the board will look at convictions, and the board will make a determination as to whether, you know, on a case-by-case basis, whether that person either receives a license or whether that person maintains a license. We are following the law that was set down. I do understand that people feel pretty strongly, especially in the mental health field, about these disclosures. The law went into effect, you know, this session, and set forth the parameters of who had to disclose and when, and that's really what these rules are following.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Let's see. I had some more written comments. So in regards to the supervision, the hours, the face-to-face hours, Alexandra Mers is stating, suggestion with the LPC requirement change in 1,500 to /2,000 hours now being called face-to-face, that we have a definition of what falls under that outside of meeting with a client.
Okay. And I think that what was helpful is one of the stakeholders clarified. I was just using the word face-to-face, but it definitely includes direct client contact versus indirect client contact. And I don't know if that helps, because that is what the language is. I had just shortened it up to include face-to-face. And I apologize, it really is direct versus indirect.
Okay. So Alexandra, if you have further follow-up on that or questions, please let us know. Let's see, we have Faith Holloway has a follow-up on that, saying, please define if 1,500 direct hours includes teletherapy, or if that is only in person.
Okay, I can talk to the board about that.
And Danielle Jones echoes that same question to please clarify regarding telehealth and direct client contact hours. All right. Do you want me to continue on, or should I wait till you're navigated?
Go ahead.
Okay. I actually see a hand raised. I'm going to switch over and let Brian Lamb speak. Brian, if you unmute your line, you can go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I just had a few quick things on the supervision, the stuff that we started with earlier. I think it would just be helpful to, when it's all decided on the requirement for training, the number of hours would be helpful if there's some sort of equivalence stated on what a university course credit hour would equal to the training. And I'm thinking specifically about folks who are doing like a PhD in counselor education and supervision who have PhD supervision courses, just to make sure that's clear for everyone. Also, I was thinking it'd be helpful to clarify, it says postgraduate. If it sounds like we're talking about postmasters, since for KCREP masters versus KCREP PhD programs, the PhD students would already have their masters when they're completing those requirements. So it may be helpful to have that wording specifically in there for postmasters and rather than just postgraduate. And then I heard in the previous stakeholder meetings, there was discussion of the training, including some element of requirement of supervision of the supervision when working towards the LPCS. Maybe that's already in the considerations of the conversation. If not, it just seems important to consider that when considering what the final requirements are going to be, since there's going to be supervised clinical hours for the LPCCs, it would just kind of make sense to me that there'd be some element of supervision of that supervision before somebody's out on their own doing it. And that's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Caroline Thornton, I saw you submitted a written comment, but I see your hand is also raised, so I'll just let you speak for yourself. Caroline, go ahead.
Hello there. I'm trying to go to where my question was. So it's regarding the 2,000 hours, and I think it reads the same before requirements before July 14th and after, but it talks about where this is. In section 2, it says at least 2,000 hours of professional counseling under clinical supervision. That is in person. Okay, and then it goes on to say must be documented as being completed not fewer than 60 days prior to the administration of the examination. And to me, this looks like you need to have your hours completed prior to taking the NCE exam, which is concerning to me if that's the intent of that, because most people are taking the NCE while they're in graduate school.
Okay.
So
I can look at that.
If that is a change, that would be an undue hardship on people that have already taken the exam.
So what I would say is it's not a change from the previous rules.
Okay.
The previous rules require that, and so I just wanted to, but I can flag that definitely.
The previous rules required that the exam be taken after all the clinical hours under supervision.
At least 2,000. Basically, what the old rule says is at least 2,000 hours of professional counseling under clinical supervision that is in person or via telesupervision, obtained in such a manner that they are reasonably uniformly distributed over a minimum of 12 months and must be documented as being completed not fewer than 60 days prior to the administration of the examination.
Oh.
That's the old rule.
Okay. That doesn't seem to be in accordance with current practice.
Okay. And so that's something I can flag.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next hand is from Faith Holloway. Faith, go ahead. I saw your written comment, but go ahead and share your comment. Faith, you're unmuted. You might want to check your microphone level. Okay, not hearing anything from Faith. So I have a written comment from her. I'll go ahead and read. I am opposed to the 3-year rule for supervision for reasons already stated, and I would propose that instead there are some requirements around new supervisors being supervised by experienced supervisors. So thank you for sharing that comment. And then Faith Holloway, I think in relation to the conversation you were just having, Karen, said maybe they mean the jurisprudence exam regarding the examination in regards to those hours. So that's a possibility.
Okay.
So thank you, Faith, for raising that option. I don't see any other hands raised, so I'm going to go ahead and read some more written comments we've received. Lisa McCormick stated, for agencies such as child welfare that have been exempt from applying for Lpcc while working on licensure hours, if the agencies still had them apply as a registered psychotherapist, now that that's no longer an option, should they be applying for Lpcc instead, or are they still exempt from that? Thank you.
That's a good question and something that I can ask the board. What I can tell you is that registration as an unlicensed psychotherapist is no longer an option. If you are not currently on the registry, you cannot be added pursuant to the law.
Okay, thank you. Michelle Keelan had a question regarding applications for licensure. She's asking, how does the 1-year limit affect those of us who are Lpcc at this time?
If you look up in those rules, and let me see if I can get us up there. Thinking it's up. There is an exception for candidates.
Your screen's not shared, Karen. I'm not sure if you intended to.
Oh, sorry. Good. Then I wasn't giving everyone motion sickness. So if you look here, it talks about it, and it may not apply, and those exceptions allowable under statutes concerning professional counselor candidates.
Okay, thank you. Holly Trians just wanted to say they appreciate the push to try to verify KCAP equivalency by program versus individual applicants, particularly in relation to Naropa. Let's see, Francisca Nix wanted to add that she proposes adding ongoing required training to maintain the supervision designation.
Okay, can you say that again?
She proposed adding ongoing training for maintaining a supervisor designation.
Okay.
Alice Sebring said, currently other licensed supervisors can offer clinical supervision to Lpccs. Will the LPCS allow for supervision of other licensed candidates?
So the supervision of other candidates would depend on the candidate's hours. So for instance, licensed clinical social work, that program, they accept in a very rare occurrence when an LCSW is not available. LPCs cannot supervise clinical hours for LCSWs. So it just depends on what mental health professional, what their Practice Act says about the requirements for their supervision.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl Stubbs wanted to echo previous comments that LAC supervision classes should help qualify for this new LPCS credential. Okay. And then another comment from Francisca Mix was, I believe, to ensure standards in clinical supervision, anyone who provides clinical supervision should meet the competency-based requirements. Thank you for that. And then Olivia Dumsnell and Mario Garcia, I have comments from you, but I'm not sure if you sent a whole comment in. Maybe I only see the partial comment. So if you have a question or a comment you want to share, feel free to raise your hand. I'm just not sure I have the whole comment. They look like they're partial, so I don't want to butcher anything. So if you have questions or comments, I see you're still on the line, so feel free to raise your hand. And if anyone else has any questions or comments, please raise your hand at this time or send something in writing, and we'll get that read out loud and included for the board's consideration. I don't see anything right at this moment, Karen.
Okay. So I'll start wrapping up. Really appreciate everybody's participation. Appreciate the comments. Again, making sure you understand that all of your written comments will be incorporated for the board. We'll take all the comments that have been provided. This will be the 4th stakeholder meeting. And then all of the written comments, and those will all be presented to the board for them to review before the rulemaking hearing. The rulemaking hearing is September the 25th at 9:30. You can go on the board's website to get the link if you did not receive that in your email. That should have been sent to all licensees. If you have any questions about that, go ahead and throw them out there now. Or you can send questions to Dora, DORA _ DPO _ rulemaking at state.co.us.
All right, we had one last minute comment from Danielle Jones. Just wanted to echo the support that the 3-year supervision requirement is unduly burdensome. And that is the only other written comment we've received, and no hands raised at this time. Oh, Mariel Garcia actually.
Okay.
Sorry, Mariel Garcia says, I'm not in favor of additional graduate classes for those of us who have already graduated. That was her comment from earlier that she wanted to clarify. So thank you for sending that in.
Okay. So again, I really appreciate all of your participation. All of these comments are going to be really helpful for the board to make sure that these rules are helpful, that they're not creating burdens, that they're complying with the statutory requirement, but making sure that they are, you know, real world, and that they're taking into consideration your experiences and your practice. So again, thank you. Everyone have a really nice weekend. Bye-bye.